Welcome back to Boss Economics World, where we take the complexities of global economics and filter out the nonsense to give you the real, unfiltered truth about what's shaking the world economy today. Get ready for a deep dive into the latest brewing chaos on this episode, where we dissect the Trump administration's last-minute theatrics, and the ripple effects they unleashed, over threats of tariffs and sanctions on Colombia. Now, for those of you who somehow missed the fireworks, get your popcorn, and brace yourself. Trump, as we know, has never been shy about using tariffs like a political baseball bat, ready to smack down any country that deviates from his policy du jour. This time, the target was Colombia, and it all came down to the handling of deported migrants. But first, let's think about this situation from the ground up. Trump threatened tariffs, escalated sanctions, dangled harsh visa restrictions, and rattled markets, all because of a diplomatic dispute over Colombia receiving deported nationals from the U.S. We'll break this down in today's episode as a prime example of what happens when economic policy is wielded like a whip rather than a well-planned instrument of diplomacy and cooperation. Let's not bury the lead. If you're someone who's been watching global trade in recent years, perhaps you have personal investments, or maybe you're just tired of hearing the word tariffs every time the economy hiccups, here's what you need to know. Trump threatened tariffs of up to 50% on Colombian goods. That's a classic page from his rulebook. Tariffs are his go-to, if you haven't picked up on that already. This time, he promised a 25% tariff right off the bat for 1 week, with a 50% escalation looming in the wings. Faster than you could mutter, trade war, the markets went into an anxious tailspin. Emerging market currencies, with the Mexican peso and the South African rand leading the decline, began to nosedive. Oh, and let's not forget the classic hedge behavior. Investors flooded toward the US dollar, which immediately regained strength after taking some hits the previous week. Now here's the kicker, while Trump did back down, thanks to a rushed diplomatic resolution between the US and Colombia, global markets did not instantly stabilize. No wonder, right? Just the simple prospect of Tariff Trump charging back onto the battlefield sent shockwaves across financial markets. The guy wields tariffs like a piñata stick at a 5-year-old's birthday party, scattering uncertainties all over. Right, so why should you care, sitting at home with your portfolio, pension fund, or small business interest? Let's start with a basic principle of economic rationality. Stable market environments foster investment and growth. Tariffs do the opposite, they upend supply chains, inflate costs of goods, and throw global commerce into complete disarray. Here, it's not just about Colombia-specific products, let's be real. Although Colombia exports coffee, coal, and precious metals to the US, the implications are far broader. What Trump's antics reveal is the insidious instability that now defines US trade policy. This rampant up and down with tariffs mindset discourages overseas investments, and worse, sinks the confidence of multinational companies who need to plan supply chains years in advance. Even though Trump backpedaled, issuing a calm down moment where all's forgiven after the agreement, markets will remember this stunt. Worse, even after the immediate issue is resolved, investors will be saying, if Trump is willing to slap a 50% tariff on Colombia, who else could be on the chopping block next week? Uncertainty remains the biggest killer of long-term prosperity. And oh, the hypocrisy. Let's not forget that just weeks prior, Trump refrained from imposing tariffs on China, probably to keep Wall Street off his back, and yet he's willing to knock an emerging economy like Colombia at the drop of a hat. The selective bullying shines through dramatically. That's not something anyone, least of all pro-free market folks, should sleep well over. But let's dig deeper. Trump insists tariffs are a negotiating tool. Now, in public policy schools, we call that carrot and stick diplomacy, except Trump seems never to offer the carrot. It's stick, and then a bigger stick with nails in it. What happened here is reflective of how, in modern global trade, we are increasingly treating sovereign economic relationships like hostage negotiations. Colombia, a sovereign nation with its own rules, laws, and economic influence, gets treated like they owe unconditionally to the US, simply because they lean on US markets. Sure, Colombia needs the US for trade, investment, and economic stability, but threatening to cripple their economy through tariffs as punishment for a participant's shuffle in the deportee game? Dictating immigration or refugee policies by economic punishment is not a trade policy. It's pure power politics masquerading as economic leverage. But does it work? Well, short-term, kind of. Colombia folded, predictably. There's only so much an emerging economy can push back against the world's most powerful economy. And here lies a broader concern, when might Trump deploy this against other nations? Tariffs are no longer just an economic tool for addressing trade deficits or perceived unfair practices. Instead, they increasingly appear as diplomatic cudgels for non-economic issues. Imagine a future president weaponizing tariffs against, say, Germany over a refugee crisis disagreement or India over climate policies. Who's next on the list? The unpredictability fosters global instability, plain and simple. For the professionals in the financial sector, and those vigilant everyday players tracking asset movements, the Trump-Colombia spat is a flashing signal we've seen before. Emerging market economies are extremely fragile in the world of US-first protectionism. As discussed, the Mexican peso and South African rand found themselves hit disproportionately amidst the fiasco despite no direct ties to the migrant deal between the US and Colombia. Here's why: investors view these economies as interlinked risk pools. When trouble brews in one fragile market, those with similar economic weaknesses or trade vulnerabilities get punished as well. This is a result of market perception that sees all emerging markets as riskier bets overall, especially in a world where US tariffs could land almost anywhere next. Now, what makes it worse is the existing debt pressures facing emerging markets. As we look at recent data, it's not surprising that 1. Public debt levels in countries like South Africa soared to 70% or more of GDP. 2. Argentina is entangled in a perennial debt crisis, coupled with the IMF's involvement. 3. Colombia's public debt already reached above the safe zone, near shallower liquidity buffers. Trump's tariff misfire may have been aimed at Colombian migrants, but who got hit worst, at least in the short run? Emerging markets globally. The real question now swirling is what structural damages are underway in these regions. Let's zoom out here. One of the loudest concerns folks like me scream about, and funny enough, it rarely gets through, is that tariffs as strategy unravel decades of painstakingly built free trade systems. Organizations like the World Trade Organization, WTO, exist to prevent this kind of economic warfare. Yet, Trump's approach is showing other leaders it's okay to bypass or undermine these systems as long as you have power. We've entered an era in which structural agreements, like NAFTA, the European Union's trade policies, and even elements of China WTO agreements, just don't seem bulletproof anymore. The US-China trade war was bad enough, now we're dealing with mini aftershocks all over the globe. Ironically, the domestic economic pain of tariffs hits home hardest. Despite Colombia and emerging markets briefly bearing greater damage, let's not forget, US importers will bear additional costs from tariffed goods, translating into higher prices for American consumers down the line. Whether purchasing coffee, bananas, flowers, or importing Colombian aluminum used for manufacturing, this boomerang effect on tariffs doesn't end at the border. Let's be clear here, despite Evan and Emily in Kentucky not necessarily realizing it, tariff wars are paid for by ordinary Americans. That's always the poorly kept secret behind protectionism campaigns. Now, before you rub your hands thinking this is just a Trump problem, rewind. Populist undertones in terms of economic protectionism are on the rise globally. While Trump leads the pack, he isn't an isolated case. Europe, post-Brexit Britain, and India's Modi are all examples of governments leaning aggressively toward more nationalist, trade protectionist policies. Look no further than Brexit's ongoing troubles with disrupted UK-European trade flow, which many free market advocates warned against. Here's the thing, raising tariffs might sound appealing politically, it gives people the feeling of taking control back, but it always comes with hidden long-term social costs, especially as supply chains across the globe are constructed for a free trade environment. Once tariffs go up, and nations retaliate or economies falter, undoing the damage takes years, if not decades. So, pulling it all together, the recent US-Colombia drama is merely a symptom of a much larger, much more insidious shift. Beneath the headlines, what we're seeing is the crumbling of the old globalist economic consensus that defined decades of prosperity post-World War II, and the advent of something messier, chaotic, and turbulent, populist economic nationalism. Sure, Colombia got off the hook this time, but tomorrow it could be Brazil or Vietnam or Kenya. Politicians around the world are learning they can use tariff threats as pressure tactics, not for trading issues but for anything where they disagree. What should you, a regular person or a savvy financial pro, take away? Examine where your exposure lies, pay attention to changing tariff dynamics, and ride the waves of financial contagion at your own peril. There's no ending to this kind of political grandstanding unless global trade systems are repaired, something that's becoming increasingly hard to imagine in a world fragmented by narrow, nationalistic priorities. Whether you like populism or not, it's now here to stay. That's all for now, folks. If you're here for cold hard truths served with a silver hammer, and a bit of well-deserved shade, hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and ring that bell. Let's make global economics the unflinchingly candid conversation it deserves to be. Feel free to comment below, have tariffs improved your life, ever? Or just raise the price tag on your favorite cup of Colombian coffee. See you next time on Boss Economics World.